So there I was, watching the most expensive military academy and three-star systems turn into the galaxy's most pretentious high school cafeteria. And at the center of it all, Maya Rodriguez, a human exchange student who looked about as intimidating as a particularly shy librarian. Now let me paint you a picture of Nexus Prime Combat Academy. Imagine if someone took every sci-fi military cliché, threw it in a blender with enough chrome to blind a small moon, and then charged parents 17,000 credits per semester for the privilege. The place was crawling with the offspring of galactic elite, all convinced they were the next great warrior of their respective species. Maya sat in the corner of the orientation hall, quietly taking notes while around her, alien teenagers flexed both literally and figuratively. To her left, Zephyr, a four-armed Kraxxian who'd apparently never met a mirror he didn't like, was demonstrating his sword techniques to a crowd of admirers. His species was known for their flashy combat style, and boy, did Zephyr live up to the stereotype. "Observe the elegant precision of the Kraxxian blade dance," Zephyr announced, his four arms moving in what I'm sure he thought was poetry in motion. Each movement calculated, each strike purposeful. This is what true martial prowess looks like. Sitting nearby, Vex, a crystalline Silthari who glowed with an annoying inner light, nodded approvingly. Indeed, the mathematical precision required for such coordination is beyond most organic species, particularly carbon-based life forms. He cast a pointed look at Maya, who continued writing in her notebook as if she hadn't heard. And then there was Korrath, a Thalorian whose idea of conversation was mostly grunting, and whose biceps were roughly the size of small planets. He didn't talk much, but when he did, it was usually to point out how weak other species were compared to his own. Enter Commander Axis, stage left. The grizzled veteran limped into the hall, his cybernetic leg clicking against the polished floor. 3 wars, 2 galactic conflicts, and one very unfortunate incident with a plasma mine had left him with more scars than original parts. He surveyed the assembled students with the kind of expression usually reserved for discovering something unpleasant on your shoe. "Welcome to Nexus Prime," he growled, his voice carrying the weight of 1,000 battles. "Some of you think you're warriors. Some of you think you're legends in the making. Most of you are wrong." His gaze swept the room and landed on Maya. "And some of you are humans." The way he said it made it sound like a medical condition. "Combat assignments are based on preliminary assessments," Axis continued. "Alpha class for the elite. Beta for the promising. Gamma for the adequate." He paused, consulting his tablet. "And Omega class for the remedial cases." Maya Rodriguez, quiet human exchange student, found herself assigned to class Omega. Because apparently, the galaxy's most prestigious combat academy had looked at humanity's track record of surviving everything from ice ages to nuclear weapons and decided we needed remedial help. The other students tried to hide their snickers. They failed spectacularly. "Don't worry, little human," Zephyr said with the kind of condescending smile that makes you want to punch something. "Omega class is perfect for fragile species. Very safe. Very protected." Maya just nodded politely and continued taking notes. Which, in retrospect, should have been everyone's first clue that they were missing something important. If you've ever wondered what daily humiliation looks like in a military academy setting, let me enlighten you. It starts at dawn with physical conditioning, which for most species involved impressive displays of natural abilities. For Maya, it involved a lot of polite encouragement about doing your best, and improvement takes time. The combat simulations were where things got really entertaining. Picture this: a state-of-the-art holographic training facility where alien teenagers could live out their warrior fantasies while a computer scored their performance. It was like a video game, except the bragging rights lasted for months. Zephyr dominated the sword combat modules, naturally. 4 arms meant 4 weapons, and he wielded them with the kind of theatrical flair that would have made a Broadway choreographer weep with joy. "Witness the ancient art of Kraxian blade mastery," he announced during one particularly show-offy session. "Each sword moves independently, yet harmoniously. It requires centuries of training to achieve such." "Actually," Maya interrupted quietly, "it's just advanced pattern recognition. Your species evolved from pack hunters, so your brain naturally coordinates multiple limb movements. It's impressive, but not necessarily requiring centuries of training. The silence that followed was deafening. Zephyr's forearms froze mid-flourish. What? Nothing, Maya said, returning to her notebook. Please continue. Vex wasn't much better. His crystalline form could channel and manipulate energy in ways that defied several laws of physics. He'd create shields, weapons, even temporary constructs out of pure energy while lecturing anyone within earshot about the inefficiency of organic matter. Carbon-based life forms are fundamentally limited, he explained to Maya during one training session. Your neural pathways are slow, your reaction times inadequate, your structural integrity laughably fragile. Evolution clearly favored quantity over quality in your species. Maya nodded thoughtfully. That's an interesting perspective. Though I'd argue that adaptability often trumps specialization in survival scenarios. Adaptability? Vex's light pulsed with what might have been amusement. What could humans possibly adapt to that superior species cannot simply overcome? We'll see, Maya said, and went back to quietly observing everyone's techniques. Korrath's approach was simpler: hit things really, really hard. His species had evolved on a high-gravity world where subtlety was a luxury and brute force was a survival necessity. He didn't speak much, but when he did, it was usually to grunt something about weak humans or pathetic earth muscles. Meanwhile, Maya continued her routine of getting knocked down, getting back up, and taking notes. Lots and lots of notes. The other students began to treat her like a mascot, harmless, slightly amusing, and completely irrelevant to anything important. Commander Axis watched these daily exhibitions with growing concern. Not about the alien students, they were performing exactly as expected. No, his concern was about the human who seemed completely unfazed by constant defeat. Rodriguez, he called after one particularly brutal simulation. A word. Maya approached, notebook in hand, looking like she was about to ask a question in study hall, rather than discuss combat training. You're not improving, Axis said bluntly. Your scores are consistently low, your technique is sloppy, and frankly, you're making the Academy look bad by association. I understand, sir. Do you? Because in 2 weeks we're hosting the Trial of Champions. The best student from each class will face a member of the galaxy's apex warrior species. It's a tradition, a test of the Academy's training methods. Maya nodded. That sounds challenging. Challenging? Axis laughed, a sound like grinding metal. Girl, it's a demonstration. A chance for our best students to prove they can stand toe-to-toe with a real warrior. And you, he shook his head, you wouldn't last 5 seconds. Probably not, Maya agreed cheerfully. And that's when Axis announced the Trial of Champions to the entire Academy. The chance for each class to select their finest warrior to face the ultimate test. A chance for glory, honor, and bragging rights that would last a lifetime. What he didn't mention was that this year's opponent was going to be special. Very special. The announcement came 3 days later, and let me tell you, it had all the subtlety of a supernova in a library. Commander Axis stood before the assembled Academy, his scarred face grim even by his usual standards. This year's Trial of Champions, he began, will feature a representative from the Xerathi Empire. The hall went dead silent. Then someone dropped their meal tray, and the clatter echoed like a gunshot. Now, for those of you fortunate enough to never have heard of the Xerathi, let me educate you. They're what happens when evolution decides that being the galaxy's apex predator isn't quite enough and throws in some extra nightmare fuel for good measure. They're 7 feet tall, covered in biometallic scales that can absorb energy attacks, and they can phase shift through solid matter at will. Oh, and they live for about 800 years, which they spend becoming really, really good at killing things. The Xerathi don't lose fights. They don't retreat. They don't surrender. They exist in a state of perpetual warfare, and their idea of diplomacy involves demonstrating exactly how many ways they can dismantle you before you have time to scream. The Xerathi champion arriving tomorrow, Axis continued, is Krazon the Undefeated. He has never lost a combat engagement in 3 centuries of warfare. Zephyr, who'd been polishing his swords with characteristic vanity, suddenly looked like he'd swallowed something unpleasant. Did you say, Krazon? The same Krazon who single-handedly conquered the Theta sector? The very same. Vex's crystalline form flickered with nervous energy. Commander, surely the trial is meant to be a learning experience, not a massacre? The trial is meant to test your abilities under extreme pressure, Axis replied. And there's no pressure quite like facing certain death. Korrath, who'd been quietly confident up until that moment, suddenly found his food very interesting. Turns out even hulking brutes have their limits. And Maya? Maya continued taking notes. The next morning, Krazon arrived. The transport ship that brought him was black as the void between stars, and when he stepped onto the Academy's landing pad, the very air seemed to recoil. He was everything the rumors promised and several things they hadn't mentioned. His biometallic scales shifted color in the light, his movements flowed like liquid death, and his eyes held the kind of cold intelligence that had calculated the destruction of entire civilizations. Greetings, he said, his voice carrying harmonics that made your bones ache. I am here for the trial. Commander Axis performed what might charitably be called a greeting but looked more like a man trying not to wet himself. Welcome to Nexus Prime. The champions from each class will. No, Krazon interrupted. One champion. The best this academy has produced. But the tradition has changed. Those terrible eyes swept the assembled students. One fight. One opponent. Who dares face the Xerathi? The silence stretched until it became physically painful. Alpha class looked at their boots. Beta class suddenly developed a collective interest in the sky. Gamma class had apparently all remembered urgent appointments elsewhere. And then a small voice spoke up from the back of the crowd. I'll do it. Maya Rodriguez stepped forward, notebook still in hand, looking like she was volunteering to help with homework rather than face galactic death incarnate. The laughter started small, a few nervous chuckles from the crowd. Then it grew. And grew. Until the entire academy was doubled over with the kind of hysteria that comes from watching someone volunteer for suicide. Krazon tilted his head, studying Maya with the interest of a scientist examining a particularly curious specimen. You are human? Yes. And you wish to face me in combat? If that's acceptable. More laughter. Someone in the crowd shouted, "This is the best joke ever." Another voice called out, "Maya versus the apex predator." What's next? A fruit salad versus a black hole. Commander Axis looked like he was experiencing some kind of existential crisis. Rodriguez, this is not a training exercise. This is not a simulation. This is. I understand, sir, Maya said calmly. When do we fight? Krazon's scales shifted to what might have been amusement. Tomorrow at dawn, little human. Try to make it interesting. As the crowd dispersed, still chuckling about the galaxy's most lopsided matchup, Maya returned to her dormitory. She had some preparation to do. If you've ever seen a training montage in an action movie, you know what to expect. Dramatic music, sweat-soaked workouts, impossible feats of strength, and the slow transformation of the underdog into a force to be reckoned with. Maya's preparation looked nothing like that. She sat in her dormitory room, quietly reading. Not combat manuals or weapons training guides, but seemingly random books from the Academy's digital library. Military history, yes, but also anthropology, psychology, and something called The Art of War by some ancient human named Sun Tzu. What are you doing? Zephyr asked, appearing in her doorway with his characteristic concern for everyone's business but his own. Reading, Maya replied without looking up. But shouldn't you be training? Practicing? Preparing for battle? I am preparing. Zephyr's forearms gestured in exasperation. By reading? Maya, you're facing Krazon the Undefeated tomorrow. This is not the time for literature. What would you suggest? sword work, combat drills, physical conditioning. He demonstrated a few flourishes, because of course he did. I could teach you the basic forms of Kraxxian blade work. It might give you a chance to last more than 30 seconds. Maya looked up from her book. That's very kind of you, but I don't think it would help. Why not? Why not? Because you're predictable. The silence that followed was the kind usually reserved for funeral services. What? Your fighting style follows classical Kraxxian forms. Beautiful, efficient, but ultimately predictable to someone who's studied them. Krazon would see through any technique you taught me immediately. Zephyr's arms drooped slightly. But predictable? Thank you for the offer, though, Maya said, returning to her book. Vex tried next, his crystalline form pulsing with helpful energy. Maya, I've been analyzing Xerathi combat patterns. I could teach you energy manipulation techniques that might give you a defensive advantage. That's thoughtful, but I can't manipulate energy like you can. Not like me, no, but humans have some capacity for bioelectric manipulation, with proper training. Training I don't have time for, Maya interrupted gently. Besides, trying to fight Krazon with energy manipulation would be like trying to outswim a fish. So what's your plan? I don't have one. Even Korrath attempted to help, in his own grunting way. Maya, you need strength. Build muscle. Hit harder. I appreciate the concern, but I'm not going to out-muscle as Xerathi. Then what? Men what? Maya looked up from her book, something about human military tactics through the ages. I'm going to be human. That's not a plan, Korrath said, his massive brow furrowed in confusion. Isn't it? Commander Axis found Maya in the library the night before the trial, surrounded by books and looking like she was cramming for a final exam rather than preparing for mortal combat. Rodriguez, he said, settling into a chair across from her. We need to talk. Yes, sir? You don't have to do this. I could call it off, claim illness, find some excuse. Why would you do that? Axis leaned forward, his scarred face serious. Because I've seen what Krazon does to opponents. I've watched him dismantle warriors who'd been training their entire lives. You're brave, I'll give you that. But bravery doesn't stop a Xerathi death strike. Maya closed her book and looked at him directly. Commander, what do you know about human military history? Some. Your species has been remarkably warlike for primitives. We've fought wars against opponents who were bigger, stronger, faster, and better equipped than us. And we've won many of those wars. How? Don't know. By being unpredictable. By adapting. By refusing to play by the rules our enemies expected. Axis studied her for a long moment. And you think that will work against Krazon? I think, Maya said carefully, that everyone is so focused on what I can't do that they've forgotten to consider what I can do. Which is... Maya smiled. Be human. Dawn broke over Nexus Prime with all the subtle fanfare of a galactic news event. Because let's be honest, that's exactly what it had become. Word had spread through the Academy's communication networks, then to the wider galaxy, and now half the known universe was tuning in to watch a human girl face down the most feared warrior in 3 sectors. The betting pools were astronomical. The odds against Maya were so high that mathematicians had to invent new numbers. The Academy's main arena had been transformed into something resembling a gladiatorial coliseum. Stands packed with students, faculty, and distinguished guests from across the galaxy. Even some Xerathi observers had arrived, presumably to watch their champion demonstrate superior martial prowess. Maya entered from the east gate, and the crowd's reaction was mixed. Some laughter, some nervous energy, and from the human exchange students, a few hopeful cheers that sounded more like desperate prayers. She wore standard Academy training gear, nothing fancy, nothing special. She carried no weapons, no protective gear beyond basic padding. She looked like she was heading to a routine sparring session, rather than facing the galaxy's apex predator. From the west gate came Krazon, and the temperature in the arena seemed to drop several degrees. He moved with the fluid grace of a predator, his biometallic scales shifting through the spectrum as they absorbed ambient energy. His presence filled the space like a physical weight, pressing down on everyone present. "Ladies, gentlemen," an assorted species, Commander Axis announced, his voice carrying across the arena. "Today's trial of champions features Maya Rodriguez of Earth, representing humanity, versus Krazon the Undefeated of the Xerathi Empire." The crowd fell silent. "Combatants," Axis continued, "prepare for battle." Krazon stood motionless in the center of the arena, waiting. Maya walked toward him with the casual stride of someone out for a morning stroll. "You may begin," Axis called. Krazon moved first, because of course he did. He launched himself forward with the kind of speed that made light seem sluggish, his form shifting between solid and phase as he closed the distance. A classic Xerathi opening, overwhelming speed combined with unpredictable positioning. Maya stepped sideways. Not a combat dodge, not a defensive maneuver, just stepped aside, like avoiding a puddle on the sidewalk. Krazon's strike passed through empty air. He spun, repositioning for another attack, this time approaching from a different angle. Maya stepped the other way, looking almost bored. Is she actually fighting?" someone in the crowd asked. "She's moving," came the reply. "But it doesn't look like fighting." Krazon's third attack came with more force, more aggression. His scales shifted to combat configuration, energy crackling around his form. Maya continued her casual evasion, stepping, turning, occasionally ducking with the kind of timing that looked accidental but couldn't possibly be. "Stand still," Krazon growled, his first words since entering the arena. "Why?" Maya asked, sounding genuinely curious. "So I can end this quickly." "That doesn't seem like a good strategy from my perspective." The crowd was murmuring now, confused by what they were witnessing. This wasn't a fight, it was a bizarre dance where one partner was trying to commit murder and the other was apparently window shopping. Krazon's attacks became more elaborate, more aggressive. He phased through solid matter, struck from impossible angles, used every technique in the Xerathi arsenal. Maya continued her infuriating evasion, moving just enough to avoid contact but never appearing to exert any real effort. "She's making him angry," Vex observed from the stands. "Is that good or bad?" Zephyr asked. I don't know." And then something interesting happened. Krazon made a mistake. Not a big one, a slight overextension during a phase strike that left him solid for a fraction of a second longer than optimal. Maya didn't attack. She just noticed. "You're favoring your left side," she said conversationally. "What?" "Your left side. You consistently attack from the right when you're frustrated. It's probably an old injury, maybe from your campaign in the Theta sector. The records mentioned you took some damage from a plasma mine." Krazon's scales flickered with what might have been surprise. "How do you know?" "I read your combat history. Very impressive, by the way. Though I noticed you tend to rely on intimidation and overwhelming force rather than adaptability." Silence. "It's not a criticism. It's worked for 3 centuries. Why change?" Krazon's next attack was pure rage, a devastating assault that should have ended the fight instantly. Maya moved not away from it, but somehow through it, emerging behind Krazon with her hand resting gently on his shoulder. "Because," she said quietly, "sometimes the best strategy is to be completely unpredictable." And then Maya Rodriguez, quiet human exchange student, did something that no one in the galaxy had ever seen before. She used a technique that didn't exist in any combat manual, didn't follow any established martial art, and definitely wasn't taught in any academy. She used pure, concentrated human weirdness. The strike, if you could call it that, was a combination of pressure point manipulation, psychological warfare, and what could only be described as aggressive kindness. She hit Krazon in exactly the right spot, at exactly the right moment, with exactly the right amount of force to shut down his nervous system without causing permanent damage. Krazon the Undefeated, terror of 3 sectors, conqueror of civilizations, collapsed like a house of cards. The arena went dead silent. The silence stretched for what felt like geological ages. Krazon lay motionless on the arena floor, not dead. His biometallic scales still shifted slightly with each breath, but completely, utterly unconscious. Maya stood over him, looking mildly concerned, as if she'd accidentally broken something valuable. Is he alive? Commander Axis asked, his voice carrying across the arena. Maya checked for a pulse. He's fine. He'll wake up in a few minutes with nothing worse than a headache. How did you? Humans are weird, Maya said simply. And then she did something that broke every remaining expectation in the galaxy. She sat down cross-legged next to Krazon's unconscious form and began to explain. Everyone spent so much time telling me what I couldn't do that nobody bothered to ask what I could do. I can't outfight a Xerathi, can't outthink a Zephyr, can't outmuscle a Thalorian, but I can do something none of you can. Which is? Axis asked. I can be completely unpredictable. Maya gestured to the stands filled with alien observers. Every species in this galaxy has evolved along predictable lines. You've developed according to your environmental pressures, your biological imperatives, your cultural expectations. You fight the way your species fights, think the way your species thinks, react the way your species reacts. And humans? Humans are the galaxy's ultimate wild card. We evolved on a death world where unpredictability was the only constant. We learned to adapt, to improvise, to do whatever it takes to survive. We don't have one fighting style, we have thousands. We don't have one way of thinking, we have billions. Krazon stirred, his scales shifting as consciousness returned. He looked up at Maya with something that might have been respect. You, how did you know? He asked. Know what? About my injury, my patterns, my weaknesses. Maya smiled. I watched you fight. I read about your battles. I studied your species' combat psychology. And then I did what humans do best, I made it up as I went along. That's not a strategy. It's the only strategy that works against an opponent who's prepared for everything except the impossible. Commander Axis approached slowly, his worldview clearly undergoing some serious reconstruction. Rodriguez, what you just did, it's not in any manual. It's not part of any training program. No, sir. It's not. Then how did you learn it? Maya's smile widened. Old Earth movies and video games. The crowd erupted. 3 centuries of military doctrine, the galaxy's most sophisticated combat training, the accumulated wisdom of a dozen warrior races, and a human had just defeated their apex predator using techniques learned from entertainment media. Movies. Zephyr sputtered, his forearms gesturing wildly. You learned to fight from movies? Not fight, Maya corrected. I learned to think. Movies taught me that the underdog wins by being unpredictable. Video games taught me that every opponent has patterns. Human history taught me that adaptability beats specialization. And you just put it all together? Humans are really good at putting things together in ways that shouldn't work but do. Krazon hauled himself to his feet, his scales shifting to what might have been amusement. I have fought warriors from 1,000 worlds. I have faced the champions of every major species. And I have never encountered anything like that. What would you call it? Maya asked. Terrifying, Krazon said. Absolutely terrifying. The crowd was going wild now, the implications of what they'd witnessed beginning to sink in. The humans weren't just another species seeking admission to the galactic community, they were something entirely new. Something unpredictable. Something that couldn't be categorized, prepared for, or countered using conventional methods. This changes everything, Axis muttered, staring at Maya as if seeing her for the first time. Does it? Maya asked. I'm still the same person who got assigned to Omega class. No, Axis said firmly. No, you're not. As the crowd began to disperse, buzzing with excitement and confusion, Maya found herself surrounded by former classmates. Zephyr looked like he was reconsidering his entire approach to combat. Vex's crystalline form was practically vibrating with curiosity. Even Korrath seemed impressed, though he expressed it mostly through respectful grunting. Maya, Zephyr said, his voice uncharacteristically humble. Could you teach us? Teach you what? How to be unpredictable. Maya laughed, a sound that somehow managed to be both innocent and slightly terrifying. You can't teach someone to be unpredictable. Unpredictability comes from being willing to throw out everything you know and try something completely different. But surely there must be some technique. The technique is not having a technique. That's not helpful. It's the most helpful thing I can tell you, Maya said. The moment you try to systematize unpredictability, it stops being unpredictable. As the arena emptied, Maya walked toward the exit, notebook in hand, looking like she was heading to her next class rather than having just redefined galactic combat doctrine. Rodriguez, Axis called after her. Yes, sir? What are you going to do now? Maya paused, considering the question. I think I'll go to the library. I want to read about Xerathi recovery techniques. Krazon's going to have a headache, and I should probably learn how to help with that. That's surprisingly considerate. Humans are weird that way too, Maya said. We fight like demons and then offer to help patch up our enemies afterward. And with that, Maya Rodriguez, the quiet human exchange student who'd just defeated the galaxy's apex predator with techniques learned from movies and video games, walked off to do homework. Because sometimes the most terrifying thing about humans isn't how dangerous we are, it's how normal we act about being dangerous. The galaxy would never be the same. And Maya just kept taking notes.